Social Psychology Lecture Part 2, Combating Prejudice. So one of the ways you can combat prejudice is by increasing the contact between two hostile groups and then having them work towards a common goal or a subordinate goal. This was clearly demonstrated by Sarif in his camp study. What he did was he established a camp where he divided boys into two groups, the Eagles versus the Rattlers, and during a 2-day cooling off period, the boys started to list characteristics of their groups. They had these groups at camp and they were given all of these different tasks to do, and they were competitive tasks. The two groups were against each other. And as they did that, there was a lot of hostility between these two groups. As a result of the competition that was these two groups were put in, they tended to characterize their group in highly favorable terms and the other group in very unfavorable terms. And so then Sarif attempted to reduce the prejudice between the two groups. And what he did was he simply increased the contact of the two groups. But that made the situation worse. They were very hostile. So then what he did was he forced the groups to work together to reach subordinate goals or common goals. And when they had to work together towards a common goal in order to be successful, this caused the tension and the prejudice to ease between the groups. And so this experiment confirmed his realistic theory. So his contact theory is that the contact between hostile groups will reduce animosity if they are made to work towards a subordinate goal. So it's not enough to just expose these two hostile groups together. So it's not like mere exposure effect. The two groups are brought together and they will still be hostile unless you give them a common goal that they must work together in order to be successful. That's the idea of one way to combat prejudice. Prejudices often lead to things like self-fulfilling prophecies. So you've heard this expression, this is a prediction that causes itself to be true. If you assume that you are going to do poor in college, that you're a poor student, often that's a self-fulfilling prophecy because then you believe that and it affects your behavior. Rosenthal and Johnson came up with the Pygmalion in the classroom experiment, which we'll be watching a clip of in class. You don't need to watch that at this time. In terms of aggression, aggression is any physical or verbal behavior intended to hurt or destroy, whether done reactively out of hostility or proactively as a calculated means to an end. So aggression varies too wildly from culture to culture and from time period to time period and person to person to be considered an unlearned instinct. So we think that biology does influence aggression, but it's not an instinct that you're born with. Instrumental aggression is interesting. Instrumental is when it's like part of a sport, like football, a lineman making a tackle. That's an aggressive act. It's instrumental. It's a means to a goal, but the intention of the aggression is not to cause pain. Lacrosse would be another example. A defender in lacrosse may act in an aggressive manner physically as part of the game, but the intent is not to cause pain. However, if that same lacrosse player thinks the player on the other team is playing dirty, it may turn from instrumental aggression to hostile aggression. And hostile aggression intends to cause injury. So there's a difference there. Being blocked short of a goal also increases people's readiness to act aggressively. This phenomenon is called the frustration-aggression principle. Under this idea, frustration creates anger, which may in some cases and in some people generate aggression, especially in the presence of an aggressive cue such as a gun. So in this case, if you have the frustration-aggression hypothesis, if you're frustrated about something and say you can't get someone to listen to you and you're in a confrontation, some people, this frustration will cause them to act aggressively, especially if there is some kind of weapon at hand. So this is when someone having a gun and having an aggressive personality, something bad then happens. So that's the frustration-aggression hypothesis. And of course with Bandura, we saw with modeling with the Bobo doll that children who viewed aggression often learned aggression. So there's some modeling of aggressive behavior that sometimes occurs. That's another theory of aggression. Another aspect of social psychology is the pro-social behavior. And this case had to do with Kitty Genovese in New York. And we're going to talk a little bit about her case, and we're going to watch a clip on her case in class. This dealt with the bystander effect, and part of the bystander effect is that any particular bystander is less likely to give aid when there are other bystanders present. They always assume that other people are going to take responsibility for what's going on. So those who thought others could also hear what was going on were more likely to ignore a victim when they pass them in the street. When more people shared responsibility for helping, there's a diffusion of responsibility. So any single person witnessing the event was less likely to help when there were a lot of people that were able to witness the event, because the responsibility is diffused. The case in which people think that everyone else is not interpreting a situation in a certain way when in fact they are not. This is the idea. So the idea of diffusion of responsibility, or pluralistic ignorance is the idea where people think that everyone else is interpreting a situation in a certain way when they're not, okay? When an emergency occurs, bystanders often assume nothing is wrong simply because the reactions of those around them does not indicate a need for worry. So people decide what to do by looking at others. If other people don't seem concerned about what they're witnessing, they tend to assume that there's no reason for them to be alarmed. Another area that's really important to social psychologists have to do with attraction, and there are 5 factors of attraction. The first is proximity, the geographic nearness of someone, and here's that mere exposure effect again. So the mere exposure effect applies even to ourselves, which I think is funny. We don't talk about this often. And because the human face is not perfectly symmetrical, the face we see in the mirror is not the same as the one our friends see. So most of us, however, prefer the familiar mirror image, while our friends like the reverse. So I think that's really interesting that we have even the mere exposure effect of our image in the mirror we prefer versus the one our outsiders actually see. I think that's pretty fascinating stuff. So repeated exposure to something breeds liking. The next aspect is reciprocal liking. You're more likely to like someone who likes you. So that's interesting. So that's pretty common. If someone likes you, you're more likely to like them back. This is a joke here on similarity. Paula Abdul had a song called Opposites Attract. That's not necessarily true. Scientists feel that opposites do not attract, that people who have similar interests are more content. So similarity breeds contentment. Liking through association. Classical conditioning can play a part in attraction. So I personally love McDonald's fries. I see there's a spelling error on this slide, but I love McDonald's French fries. And if I see the same worker every time I go there, I may begin to associate that worker with the good feelings I get from McDonald's. So that's the idea of you like something because you associate it with something positive. And of course, there's physical attractiveness. We perceive attractive people to be healthier, happier, more sensitive, more successful, and more socially skilled, though we don't perceive them as being more honest or compassionate. Attractive, well-dressed people are more likely to make a favorable impression on potential employers and also to enjoy occupational or career success. We also know that an averaged face, a face that is, much more, shares common characteristics with a lot of people, is considered more attractive. So we'll look at some pictures of that. I think this one's funny, the hottie factor. The idea that physical attractiveness predicts dating frequency. So they date more, people who are physically attractive. And again, this is just like I said, they're perceived as healthier, happier, and more honest and successful than less attractive counterparts. Although that's kind of there's some controversy on that. Some people say they're not perceived as more honest or more compassionate. Some others say they are. But mainly you just need to know that they're seen as healthier and happier and more successful. So in terms of what is beauty and how do we find someone attractive, we find that faces that are much more symmetrical and balanced, in addition to being averaged, are more attractive. We also know that beauty is influenced by culture. What one culture finds beautiful, another may not. So obesity is revered in Mauritania, and so young girls are sometimes force-fed to obtain a weight the government has described as, our government has described as life-threatening, but is seen as attractive. Here are some gross examples of things that are considered beautiful in some cultures, but not in others.